let's talk about something a little, quote, political. And that is the fact that modern day Republicans and Libertarians tend to speak much about freedom, tend to speak much about reclaiming our rights, but have a hard time exactly defining what those rights are and where exactly they come from. Now, even if they do acknowledge where they come from, okay, that is not the Constitution or written works, but rather nature or God directly, how do you define what a right is? And is it really universal as it should be if it's given to us by God? Or are you only applying it through the lens of which your country has given you, the propaganda that you were fed in school, under the terms of which our founding fathers gave, but not any further? Have you seen the bigger picture to all civilizations as to how they rise and fall? Because then you start to see a bigger picture that has to deal with philosophy that goes back to ideas of Aristotle and Plato and many other philosophers. I'm not one to speak upon deep political philosophy, but there is a lot to learn there, indeed, and going all back to the understanding of law and habits, we start to get even closer to what really is simply a matter of understanding human behavior. That's what it comes down to. That's why you notice a lot of the writings by Aristotle, Plato, and their teacher, Socrates, and many others, often wrote about human thought and action, right? Because that is intertwined here. We're talking about what actions do we take in modern society, what actions do we push on other people, what actions should be done over other people. This then goes into the idea of laws. And so what you have here is now a whole political spectrum of understanding, well, these people want this action, these people want this action, these people want this action, and frankly, republicanism, libertarianism, liberalism, these are all just terms to represent different forms of means of action behind different forms of means of political, philosophical thought. And when we look at those, we have to question, well, are these considering our natural rights? Or are these already, by their nature of wanting to rule over somebody, by their nature of imposing it upon somebody, ignoring that? Because if we are all truly equal and we all have the same rights, then nobody has the right to rule over another. Right? So then you may speak upon democracy and say, well, it's your government, you get to decide, so then therefore, you're part of the decision-making process. By what? Simply your vote? If you were born into a country, did you truly consent to living under this government establishment and having to pay taxes? Do you want to pay taxes? What if you don't? And you're threatened by force of violence to pay them. So essentially that's slavery. Because the definition of slavery is among being forced, to work and pay, and not really having the choice in the matter. There's ownership over you. Okay, because it is always wrong for somebody to create a matter of harm, because a right action is that of which doesn't harm. A wrong action is that which does harm. That's how we define our rights, by knowing right and wrong, objectively for what they are. If we were subjective, we'd be playing into politics and deciding, well, what do we want to do to be God, be nature, and to decide what rights are given to others, and saying, well, yeah, they are given by the politicians that are currently in office, and how they recognize those rights under God. No, those rights are there permanently. There's nothing nobody can do to touch it. It's all a matter of understanding in the mass public, not in the politicians. Okay, politicians' laws affect our society. So what? Those politicians have no power without the millions of people who follow them. Okay, so that's where you can really debunk these political ideologies into voting one person or pushing one particular ideology. It doesn't make any sense. Everybody, as human beings, are innately unique. Everyone's going to think different. Everyone's going to have their opinions. And it's a beautiful thing to see. In fact, we should embrace that difference, that uniqueness inherently in nature. So, if we learn from that, and we try to see, though, well, we do need something that is binding, that is universal, that we can understand, that will create order, right, we say, because that's what laws are for. We want to create order in the world out of, what people might cause chaos and violence, and essentially to prevent wrongdoing from taking place, there needs to be a level of enforcement of quote-unquote laws or rules, so to keep people in order, hence to bring order. And if we have a perfect balance of those things, then everything will just come into place. And this is often in libertarian speak, and I don't always say republicanism because that has always changed through many years. Libertarianism has stayed pretty consistent when it comes to small government or limited government or what is called monarchism. And republicanism has been leaning toward that in recent years. And it's part of the reason why I got into such a thing in 2016. And that was because I was new into politics. I didn't know what statism was. I didn't know what natural law was. I didn't define rights, but yet I knew everything about certain issues, about certain people, where they stood in certain issues, and never questioned the very nature of, should that person be in such a position? Does this institution we call government even exist, or does it simply even have the right to belong? Right? Is it actually right, or is it actually, by its nature, a monopoly on violence, to which it is, as explained heavily and deeply in The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose, in The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke, in Mark Passio's Natural Law Seminar, in many different books, in many different writings. Lysander Spooner from the 1800s and an abolitionist and an anarchist talk about going the full way toward the truth. Not many people know about him, but he spoke of natural law as well. And he fought against slavery. That was one form of slavery. The worst form of slavery is mental enslavement. Look at my video on slavery. You'll find out that we still are under slavery, and the fact that people can excuse wrongdoing through believing in government and allowing its existence, as is done by Republicans and Libertarians alike. We are continuing one of the worst forms of slavery, mental enslavement, that is trapping people into thinking that they should have lack of self-worth, or that people really do have this vested authority, that they shall be the ruler, and that the order followers shall have that moral obligation to obey. No one ever questions that when we're talking politics, because let's face it, that's philosophy. And so when I talk to somebody who is political about this, they say, well, I'm not here to talk about philosophy, I'm here to get things done. I want to talk about politics. But politics is supposed to be based on philosophy, as I mentioned, for that legitimizes the existence and necessary need for politics to begin with. Otherwise, politics, what ground does it have? Okay, if it's all just based in opinion, to which it often is, then frankly, are we really working with the truth? And if we're saying that we want human rights and we don't want to get it away, well, do we really know how we're doing that if we're constantly talking about opinions and imposing certain wills upon others? And when it comes to this idea of limited government and some of those arguments, I made a video about that too that I highly suggest you check out if you're among this belief system. And like I said, many people are nowadays. And the worst part about it is a lot of younger folks are turning to this because they think it's a source of common sense, looking at prageru, looking at Turning Point USA, all these more Zionist front organizations, but very conservative-based or libertarian-based, and they are using a lot of common sense, and they say it all the time too, common sense, common sense legislation, common sense this, common sense that, but yet they're still voting people into office. They never question where those rights are coming from. They can't define them exactly. It becomes very difficult if they are challenged on such a thing. And I think more people need to be challenging them on such a thing, because there are deeper problems at hand. And that deeper problem is the mindset people have about the very world that they live in. Not so much the people that they elect or the certain laws that are passed, but the very mindset itself, which requires education. As even some of the founding fathers said themselves, you need education as the only sure reliance for liberty. And many people have spoken of education as a means. And why is that? Oh, well, if we are mentally enslaved, it only makes sense. You need education. You need to affect the minds of people. So this isn't about necessarily physical change here, which we often see, through government and making it sound like it's some sort of physical object we can identify, even though it isn't. We can't actually point to it and say this is what government is. It's just a bunch of people who actually think they have the legitimate right over somebody else, and that they can make decisions for their fellow neighbors and friends, and if some people agree to it and some people not, they'll just go with the majority. This is nonsense. This is nonsensical. Nobody should push anything on anybody. Everybody should live their life freely, and most people agree to the idea of freedom, yet by principle of action, they are immediately going against it by pushing something on other people and saying this is what you must do. It's absolutely nonsensical, but they will justify it through means of using truth and mixing it with lies, and that's what makes it more dangerous. And you may not understand this if you are somebody who still has this mindset of republicanism, libertarianism, or if you had it for a couple years or even longer. I'd expect you to be deeply into that and may not know a way out of it, especially since it's a fun little sports game to play every 4 years in the primary election and choosing a new person to run for office. I don't blame you. It's a game they want you to play, and it's a game they got a lot of people hooked on. It's a nice theater show. It makes a lot of money too. Gets a lot of publicity. And do you ever question, again, the deeper beliefs that are going on here? I'm on stage, I'm running for president, vote me in, I'm going to fix everything. So if you were to ask someone, for example, who wants to change, nobody would raise their hand. And if you ask people who wants change, everybody raises their hand, because no one wants to take that responsibility for themselves and being it. And then you tell me, oh, well, you're never going to get people to be responsible. In a free world, you will. By necessity, people have to be self-responsible for their own property, for their own life. They have no choice. But because the world isn't free, people let these things happen. They just start to live with it. They start being okay with the fact that they're slaves, like this, like the slaves we talk about in the 1800s, right? They had food, they have shelter, they're living secure. And once they were free, they're like, what do I do with my life? Oh no, I have to find a way to do this and do that. Oh no, I have all these responsibilities now. And I kind of actually liked it when I was a slave. See? This comfortable, sluggish, lazy, just protection, fake sense of security, and it is ultimately just a form of slavery. Whereas you have this on the other side, this dangerous, very responsive, survival, which is life essentially, nature, anarchy. These are all terms associated with freedom. And that's what anarchy is. Because you probably came to that assumption, like, oh my gosh, no government's going to be anarchy, and you probably already think I'm a leftist if you're listening to this in the modern world. But that's not what I am, and you can't label me as such. If I am simply a human being who recognizes that I own myself, and that the word anarchy means no rulers, which by self-evident nature and natural rights, only I own myself. And I don't have the right to rule over somebody else, because that's their own property by natural law rights. I can't change this process. I'm not nature, I'm not God, nor am I believing that I can through the belief system called statism. And so thus, I'm not playing into the conservative, libertarian, liberal game or politics in any form. I'm simply recognizing that I'm human and that I'm not special in any way, shape, or form. And I don't want to be put on a pedestal in any way, shape, or form. And I don't want to put other people on pedestals in any way, shape, or form. I want people to be truly stinking equal. Is that something hard to ask for? And you say, well, you can't really truly achieve equality. Well, you're never going to achieve equality in a pyramid system that keeps knowledge away from others and puts certain people above others, claiming that they have the moral legitimate right to rule over others and steal their money and use it for their own income. I mean, this is nonsense. And saying that you have to go to war, and if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen to you, and literally telling people how to live their own lives. I mean, this is very similar to, people believing that they need a certain drug to feel healthy, and it's controlling their life. They're dependent on it because they feel like, oh my gosh, I can't live without this. When if they really just open their eyes to the alternative and see that it is possible to live without it, that they actually can. And if they put a little bit of action steps and practicality into their life, they can make it possible. And so that's what we have to do with people one-on-one. And you may say, oh, this is a hard thing, we can't do it with anybody. Heck, that's why we call it the one great work. It's the one great work for a reason. It is not an easy thing to do, to wake people up and to educate them about their natural law of rights, and to say you should be free from all government, and that you should free up your other fellow men so everyone can stop paying taxes and you could be truly free, because that's what freedom is choosing literally how you want to live your own life, free from all types of restriction, okay? Except that of morality, which is actually knowing your rights, which is natural law to begin with, the very reason why you would succeed from government. Okay? But it's not succeeding from government. It's succeeding from the belief in government. That's what it is. Okay? So it's understanding that's the most dangerous superstition, and that's why Larkin Rose titled it that his book. So look into the materials, look into the playlist I have in the description below, and learn more for yourself. If you're somebody who is on the path toward wanting freedom and recognizing individual rights, I don't blame you, because I was in your footsteps just as everyone else was. The real anarchists were, the voluntarists, the agorists, okay? They're the natural human beings, but the sovereigns, but going the full way for truth and not excusing a wrongdoing that's innately wrong by nature is understanding that, yes, we don't want democide to ever occur. Yes, we don't want government to grow again in the disastrous cycle it always has been doing, because people keep believing in such a system, and so it always rises and falls and ends up with millions of deaths annually. We don't want those deaths to happen, and thus we want to save lives. We don't want inequality to happen. We want to create true equality. We don't want this fake sense of security and freedom. We want to protect ourselves and our family and our friends, and obligate each other to be responsible for our own lives and to have fun, without being spied on and data collected all the time. And there's still going to be businesses and corporations, but now we'll have more small businesses. Do you see the brighter day in the future with more freedom? Well, you share that with people too. Because if you give them the inspiration, because most people already want freedom, then it doesn't matter if they're libertarian, leftist, whatever. Everybody wants it. It's a matter of how we achieve it. And that's why we put all these political banners over everything. So understand natural law, and we can unite everybody. We can understand the root to everything. But we need numbers of people sharing this education, this knowledge, and bring it out to the world. So I encourage you to look at my website, nita.one. That stands for Nature is the Answer .1. And that is a movement that I created based around these ideas, so we can bring it to even more people. And you can share your voice, and you can share your materials, you can edit my materials. We can all be in this together to truly free the world into the reality that it is, that every action that we do is governed by these laws, and these laws basically tell us, what are these actions going to do? They're going to contribute to a positive manifestation in the world or a negative manifestation in the world. And anytime there's control, anytime there's fear from that control, and that's creating that control, and then there's this oppression, there's this confusion inside of ourselves, we have a chaotic world. Government is chaos, not anarchy. They want you to think the exact opposite. When I say they, I mean those who actually seek power, who seek to keep it. The only way they keep it is if they keep the masses below them in the game, especially if they control both sides of the political parties. Again, I refer to, the Zionist or anybody who, is really up there and manipulating others psychologically. You may call them social engineers. And they're living life comfortably, and they're living it basically, on the backs of others. It's a pyramid system where you can see a bird on the top pooping onto another bird, okay? And they have no poop on them because they're at the top, right? And so there's nobody above them. And then you have all these birds, as you keep going down the pyramid system, the birds at the very bottom of the base are covered in poop because of all the people above. And then that's why they're so upset always at the people that are above them. It's only natural as a human response to dislike that hierarchical system because it's unnatural. And there's natural hierarchies, and we work together, and then it's not really so much of a hierarchy, especially if it's voluntary, and those happen in nature all the time. There's families and friends and organizations, and sometimes there's conflict there too, and we understand it for similar reasons. But can we do so for government in recognizing that this is such an unnatural system of a couple hundred people ruling over millions of others, and us giving credence to its existence and saying, well, we're a slave, but if we just vote a new slave master, everything will be fine. But no, we have to recognize that the whole dynamic of masters and slaves to begin with is wrong, outright wrong, so we can get rid of it. And people who thought it was impossible to free the slaves, and oh my gosh, how would society work without it? It's the same exact arguments people make for having government in existence. So think about that. Really connect the dots here, and you will see something bigger that nobody in politics will ever speak of. Because that's how we really get our freedom, is understanding what freedom is, and that is truly living our lives free from external control that we give credence to by our belief that we need it. Okay, so essentially it's our belief that we think it's natural. And I'm saying it isn't, and that's why I say nature is the answer, because if you understand natural law, you understand natural rights, you understand natural health, you own yourself, you own your own body, you understand that what nature has is to provide for us, and that man-made systems, man-made medicine is not going to ultimately heal you. You will heal you, and you must learn from nature in order to do so. Thank you. This is Corey Angelat. Nature is the answer.